Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome to the White Knuckle Podcast, powered by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 29. This is episode number 2 in a series of 4 on trail cameras. Today we get to talk with Bronson Strickland from MSU's Deer Lab, and he breaks down the process of doing a trail camera survey. I think probably the coolest part of this interview is just all of the different information that you can garner from your trail cameras. You know, we've all used them for a long time now. I've used them for as long as I can remember, and I've never really put the camera to use like he explains you can use it. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope you're enjoying the episodes on trail cameras. With that, let's get on with the show. Sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Mr. Bronson Strickland. Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast. Today we have joined with us, or rather joined with me on the other end of the line is Bronson Strickland. Bronson is the co-director of MSU's Deer Lab, and also now the co-host of Deer University, a podcast that was sort of born out of the Mississippi State Deer Lab's research. Is that correct, Bronson?
That is correct. Yes, thank you.
We're getting together today to talk about trail cameras. You know, everyone uses trail cameras in today's world. Not everyone. There may be a few people that are off the grid yet with that. But by and large, most of the conversations that surround a trail camera or the trail camera world are really just talking about big buck pictures. Now, I've heard you mention it a few times, and that's why I wanted to do this show, is to find out how it was that you use your trail camera to make better decisions about your herd's health, and you know the sex ratio and all the things that you would do doing a quote unquote trail camera survey. So how do you go about doing it, and what should you hope to what information should you hope to get from doing such a thing?
Well, you get just about everything you need biologically for management. So from a well-conducted camera survey, you know, a scientifically conducted, you're going to get estimates of deer density, sex ratio, age structure, and a number or a metric that is really, really important is what we call recruitment. And recruitment is simply a biological term for fawns per doe. And so that is a way to gauge the productivity of your deer herd. So literally from a well-conducted camera survey, you know how many deer are on my property on the average, what is the sex ratio male to female, what is the age structure of bucks, and then what is the reproductive output. And those are all the metrics that we need to determine, is our deer population doing well? Is it doing poorly? Is it in check? When you couple that information with some simple harvest data, and where the harvest data can come in is looking at body condition. So we want to know if those deer are in good condition, average condition, or poor condition. And when you get that type of information or those types of information, it literally tells you which way to steer the ship. Do I need to lower density? Do I need to, can we allow density to grow? Do we need more food? Basically everything. So we put a lot of emphasis on taking those cameras from being just a recreational. And hey, you know, Jason, we do it too. I mean, we're like a kid in the candy store as well, where when we pull that SD card out, we like to look at those bucks, and we like to look at which bucks are targeted for, you know, for harvest, which ones are targeted to keep, and we want to let them grow older. But bottom line, we take that information and we have a very simple but systematic process where you can take those pictures and determine all of this management information from it. So it's just a wonderful tool.
You mentioned a scientific survey, and when you said that, I went, oh, well, nothing I do is scientific. And I think, many people, upon hearing that are instantly thinking, well, I'm not capable, and maybe I'm wrong, but that's what came to mind. When you say scientific, can you define what that meant?
Yeah, maybe a better way to say it would have been systematic. So we give you a formula. We have a cheat sheet that you can use. And Jason, why don't I email it to you when we're finished recording, and maybe it could be made available to people listening. They can download it for free of charge. It's a PDF.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes.
What this does, it takes you step by step. Basically, you want to turn your property into a grid. And what I mean by that is if you have, 500 acres, then you're going to slice your property up in a grid of 5 100-acre blocks. And you're going to put these cameras out in areas where you don't want it to be totally random. You want to put them in areas where, you think you're going to see deer. And depending on the state you're in, some places you can use it with bait and some places you can't. But basically, it is a set number of cameras. You know what the camera density is, meaning the number of cameras per unit area, and then you run those cameras for a certain number of days. That's really all we're talking about, is that we have now standardized the way we are conducting the survey. And then the information we can glean from that all comes down to basically the ratio of the uniquely identifiable bucks to the total buck photos. Now, why is that important? That is basically your extrapolation factor or your fudge factor. Let me give it to you another way. When you get a picture upon picture upon picture upon picture of does, or a couple does, or 3 does, it's very, very difficult to tell which doe am I seeing over and over. Which ones are new, and which ones am I seeing over and over. So what we use as a way to determine that is that we use the ratio of bucks. Bucks are identifiable. Now it can get tricky, with smaller antlered bucks or spikes or really, really small 6-pointers. It can get tricky. But on the average, the ratio of, okay, I have got, I'm going to do some quick math in my head and it'll probably be wrong, so I'm going to embarrass myself here. But let's say I have 100 photos of bucks over my study period. But I know 10 of them are unique. 10 of them are unique. I just kept getting pictures and pictures of the same 10 bucks over and over. That is the ratio that you use now you apply that same ratio to the number of does that you saw. So if you had 200 pictures of does, that same ratio would give you, 20 does. And so that's how you literally figure out how many deer, the deer density, the deer population on your property.
So if I can just stop you there for a second and do some car salesman math or whatever we want to call it. If I'm understanding you correctly, if I get in a 2-week period, 100 pictures of bucks, and of those 100 pictures of bucks, there's unique 10 different bucks, then you would use that same ratio of pictures to unique does, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay, I'm with you.
What you use now is that number. You're saying, okay, I used bucks because I cannot uniquely identify bucks, but you turn around and say, okay, so we're assuming that 10% of the total pictures represented unique deer, different deer. And so you apply that adjustment factor to the rest of the photos.
Okay.
And that's your correction factor.
Okay. Well, there you already answered one of the questions I had written down.
And we have it, Jason. We have it spelled out. There's another question is, well, how long should I run the survey? Do I need to run it for 3 days, or do I need to run it for 2 weeks? And really what we found is that after about a week, it's diminishing returns. That usually once the cameras are live, that after about a week, the rate at which you pick up new deer drastically declines. And so you could run it for yet another week, but it's probably not going to change your population estimate that much.
Sure. Okay. I see what you're saying.
The other question we get a lot, Jason, is, man, these and trail cameras are getting more and more affordable, and that's awesome. But we get the question, well, gosh, I've got, I'm in a hunting club and we've got 2,500 acres. We don't have cameras to put a camera per 100 acres. Well, we would just do a system where you would take half the property and, run the survey 1 week, and then pull your cameras and redistribute them, in the same fashion for the next week. And then you just, combine your surveys like that. And so there's usually a way around for all the shortcomings people have. If you're the type of person that you're going to be able, you and people you hunt with can put your hands on 10 to 20 or more cameras, typically you can do a very good job conducting a good scientific survey.
So I'm going to, just for a second, abuse the privilege of getting to host the podcast with you here and ask specifically about my property. Let's say for the purposes of this conversation that I hunt 100 acres, just to keep the math easy, and my neighbor next to me, they have 100 acres, and let's say there's a total of 5, or let's make it 6 landowners that each own 100 acres. Now, those 100 acres aren't all going to be timber. Let's say, the ratio's 50-50. Do you get so specific on where you're placing these cameras that you only count a certain amount of acreage as when you're looking at that ratio of cameras to acres? Does it matter whether there's timber on it or not?
Well, think of it like this, Jason. Think of it as it needs to be 100 acres or whatever the area of a deer habitat. So it doesn't necessarily need to be timber. It could be an old field, that's providing cover. But you would not want to include. So again, a real easy example here. So if you had this just ginormous soybean or cornfield, obviously you're not going to be having the deer density of deer going into the very core center of that 1,000-acre soybean field would not be the same as deer using the edge adjacent to the soybean field or the cover, whether that be forest or old field or what. So yeah, our fancy term for that is stratify. We stratify the property based on where deer are going to spend their time, where we're likely to encounter them. And so it wouldn't be wise to put a camera in the middle of a Walmart parking lot. There's a Walmart parking lot on your property. It's just a dead zone. We're not going to include that acreage.
Okay.
We're only going to include the acreage of where deer spend time.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep. So, so that was sort of the easy way of looking at it. Now I'm going to throw another question at you. In Wisconsin, typically, I believe, I'm just whipping through my plat book here real quick, 640-acre blocks, I believe is what it is. And let's say on that 640 acres, there's 11 different landowners. And all those landowners are open to conducting a survey. However, you would want to somehow break up how much actual timber is there, if everyone's willing to do the survey, you'd pick out, you said 1 camera per 100 acres. So let's just call it six cameras. And let's say if it was all wooded, let's say, and then if you had a particular landowner that, didn't have the best cover or something like that, maybe they bowed out of it or something like that, you could still accomplish it, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, and that would be so much more powerful, Jason, if you could get the landowners to cooperate. And cooperating may be just giving you access, and then you share the data with them afterwards. But the more replications and the more samples that you have, the more accurate your estimate is going to be. So it would be advantageous to you if you were right in the middle of that 640-acre block and you could scrounge up 6 cameras. It would be great for you to run the survey for that whole 600 acres and collect all the data, because there's going to be a lot of deer, of course, that overlap that you may see on a 100-acre block that you may see on the other. So you're going to get a bigger picture of kind of what the average deer population is in terms of the average deer density, sex ratio, and age structure. Okay.
So, all right. I believe I've figured out how to accomplish that. And the guys that and gals that are in the block that I have hunted in the past are all pretty open to doing whatever's best for the greater goal, I guess, and that's making an educated guess at what kind of sex structure we have, because in the past it's relatively old school Wisconsin thinking we don't shoot does because, well, we don't shoot does. And now obviously with management that's evolved the way that it has, that's become a bigger priority for many people, and we find ourselves not really knowing what the sex ratio is. And if we took the Department of Natural Resources word for it, I don't think that would be necessarily accurate, because they have a hard time, gauging an exact specific area. In what they're doing, it's more of a blanket, I would say, in terms of the numbers that they're giving us. So you go out, you put all these cameras out, and then you've got some sort of format that we're going to make available to our listeners. And you hope to garner what information out of that? Again, recruitment, which is fawns per doe, right?
Exactly.
And the sex ratio really are the two biggest things that you're going to find out.
Yeah. Well, when you start thinking, think more like an accountant, and I'm not one, so that makes insulting to an accountant. But when you think about sustainably harvesting a deer population based on your objectives, always qualify with that, based on your objectives, you need to know recruitment, because recruitment means production. How many fawns are being recruited into the population each year? And then you start understanding, okay, then there should be this many bucks the next year, minus harvest rates and natural mortality and disease mortality, and this many bucks the next year. So that is literally the foundation of harvesting, is you've got to know your inputs, right? How many fawns am I putting into the population each year? And generally, it'll vary a little bit here and there, but it's pretty much the golden rule. Half the fawns are bucks, half the fawns are does. You can start thinking how many buck fawns are now being recruited into the population each fall and winter, and then you start looking down the road at production. How many bucks can we harvest? From this 640-acre area or 6,000-acre area. Those are the types of things you can figure out from that. And Jason, like we've talked in the past, you and I were talking on the phone a few weeks ago. Told you I was writing this simulation model, and it's doing just what we're describing here. Is it's going to hopefully be a tool for people someday, kind of like a spreadsheet where they can figure this kind of stuff out. But all those buck fawns that produce, remember, only a small proportion of those are going to turn into really, really large antlered bucks at maturity. And so how many buck fawns you're producing, and then the density of adult bucks you have, is really going to dictate how it's going to inform my expectations for how many big bucks, and we can use the word quality buck here or trophy buck here, or, whatever you'd like. But it informs your expectations of what the landscape and the management scenario that you're in, what it's capable of producing. And so that's why I really, really encourage this type of stuff is once you know the density, once you know the recruitment, and you start forecasting out the next year, and you can start figuring out, okay, well, again, just an easy number. Okay, well, we should at any given time have about 50 bucks, on and off of our property. But only a small proportion of those, probably only 5 of those 50 bucks, are what we're really looking for in terms of a quality buck or a trophy buck. So it's really, all about, with me, it's about accounting. It's accounting for that population.
Right. And I would think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I would think that after a period of time, when you've done this for a period of years, I would assume that you would see some trends develop. In other words, if over the course of time you end up having this percentage, X percentage of your bucks are 3 years old or better, over time, am I correct in assuming that, as you build up your data over the years, you can start to expect that that's going to be the result because of previous? Okay. Yeah. So it becomes less of a guessing game, and that's the goal of this whole thing, is have it become less of a guessing game, and more of an exact, well, maybe not exact science, but more, more scientific than what it's been in the past, by saying, well, I went out and sat on this field, I just saw 30 does and fawns in the course of an evening, therefore, in 2 bucks, that means, my sex ratio is way out of whack. Well, that's not necessarily the case, because that's hardly scientific. However, it is the way that, in the olden days, or in many cases, I think still the way that things are determined in at least in my part of the world. But
I think that's true, Jason, in everyone's part of the world. I mean, think of the classic example of where'd all the bucks go? We don't have any bucks on our property, or we don't have any 3-year-old bucks on our property. Well, you get somebody that puts 4 or 5 cameras out on your property, and you learn, well, we do have those bucks. They're just only, they're behaving nocturnally. They've been disturbed too much. They're not showing themselves during hunting hours. So it's more reliable from that perspective of truly getting unbiased insight, into the characteristics of the population.
Let me ask you another question that, again, is probably self-serving, so I apologize. But I just, prior to getting on the recorded call here, we talked a little bit about the podcast that we were just finishing up with respect to public hunting. And certainly part of my strategy this year in hunting the public is going to be doing trail cameras. Is it reasonable to expect, even though I'm the only one that's going to be looking at these trail cameras, let's say, for instance, I've had a camera out for a week or 2 weeks, let's call it 2 weeks, in a really good spot, or at least what I feel like is a really good spot, and I've got 3 different deer on camera. Would it be safe to assume that the deer density in that area is relatively low, or is that sort of a irresponsible guess?
I wouldn't call it irresponsible. You have just left yourself open to so much bias. You've left yourself open to so much random chance. So, and what I mean by that is, depending on where you place that camera, you may have been really, really lucky or really, really unlucky. So that was why, in that case, Jason, I would encourage you, if you were going to really get some information, is you would either need to move that camera around, give it a week here, give it a week there, etc., or you would want to put out 3 or 4 or 5 cameras and kind of use the average response of what you're seeing. I think that would be more reliable information for you.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Interesting.
Another big thing, Jason, that affects all of this, and this all depends on where you're at in the country, both legally, what is allowed, and then culturally, what's acceptable. In the South, we typically do these with a bait. And in Mississippi, for example, you can't just willy-nilly do it. You need to apply for a permit. Our state wildlife agency needs to know, and it's easy to get. You just have to fill out a form. But what you can also do with that is, if you're just putting it on a trail, you're probably not going to get as many observations. You're just, the spatial extent of that camera is essentially getting what is coming down that trail. If you're using bait, now you have kind of, for lack of a better word, you've increased the influence of that camera. The probability of you getting more deer on photo has increased. And so the system that we use down here is that we always recommend pre-baiting for 1 week. Now, you can pre-bait for 2 weeks if you want, but basically you are getting those deer, you have given them knowledge that there is a bait pile, and they're going to start coming to it. And then once you have learned that that deer are routinely coming to this bait pile, and then you start your camera survey and run it, for 7 days or up to 10 days. So your scenario versus, one like this where you're setting it up over whole property is going to differ a lot whether or not you used bait or not.
Right. Okay. So I guess the reason that I was asking the question with respect to the public hunting areas is just, to try and get a gauge of I guess I was in the back of my head, I was thinking, well, I wonder if I can gauge the likelihood of me, what kind of deer I should expect to see based off of these trail camera pictures that I'm getting or not getting. And it sounds like, unless you're going to tip the scales in your favor, which is illegal in the state of Wisconsin, to use any kind of attractant with respect to, bait or mineral or any of that stuff. So it makes it a little bit harder. It would be hard to make a educated guess off of the information that you're getting unless you're really good and to some degree of certainty that the area that you have your camera in is going to be as a rule used heavily by those deer, right?
Yeah. Is the area I picked representative, in terms of deer activity? Is it representative of the rest of the area? And then if it is, the thing about it, you just wouldn't know unless you ran your camera for a week over here and a week over there, and then you might start to begin to see some trends to make the info a little more reliable. Okay.
So just by moving it around, maybe you could gain a little bit more insight into what's actually there. And okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So let me just flip my page back here. When you mentioned earlier in our in our chat here, you mentioned what condition the deer are in, and I'm assuming you're meaning when you harvested one, you're going to take a look at it. What is it that I'm not a doctor, but what is it that you would look for? What is it the average person should look for when getting an idea of what the condition of the deer are in? What condition the deer is in?
Okay, the gold standard, and I say gold standard because it's the most common in terms of what you can measure, but body weight, we call it age-specific body weight. So we need to know that buck that was harvested that weighed 170 pounds or 230 pounds, we need to know, was that a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, or a 4-year-old? And within your region, and these are typically data and averages that every single person can get from their state wildlife agency, is they can contact a deer biologist that works for their state wildlife agency and say, hey, in my region in such and such county, what's the average weight of a 3-year-old buck or a 2-year-old buck or a 4-year-old buck? And they may not have it at their fingertips, but they can probably get their hands on it and get it back to you. And what you do with that then is you see where you're at. Now, you don't want to come to any conclusions based on 1 or 2 deer that you harvest. It's like, Jason, what you were saying earlier about over time, when you routinely collect these harvest data, you begin to see what the average 3-year-old buck on my property is. What's his body weight? What's the average score of the antlers? And that way you can tell, gosh, I'm really below average, compared to, what the state wildlife agency reported. And then you need to look into it. What's the reason for that? The other thing that everyone can do, and there are measures for this, but it's a little more complicated to do, and therefore people don't do it. But just with observation, when you harvest those deer in the fall and winter, and you see a lot of fat, when you pull the skin off of them, and there's a lot of fat on the rump and on the belly, that is a very, very good sign. So that means they are, if they're below body weight, if they're below average body weight, but they have a lot of fat on them, that would tend to tell a biologist type that, well, in the past, maybe conditions weren't that good for this buck, but we had a great acorn crop or something like that, and so this buck was able to put a lot of fat on. But you really look at that stuff over time with many, many samples of every age. And that's why deer biologists are so gung-ho with, you got to pull that jawbone out. Pull that jawbone out and get somebody to age it for you. That's the reason we do that.
One other question that I had written down, and this is maybe getting too technical, so just let me know if it is, but is there settings on the camera that you would recommend? In other words, I could set up a camera to take a 3-picture burst every 30 seconds. Is there anything that you've heard or that you found on the average works better than another setting? In other words, maybe is it every minute, every 5 minutes, or isn't that important?
Great question. And I hate to give a "it depends" answer, but unfortunately, it depends. If you're in a place that allows bait, and you have pre-baited for a couple weeks, and you have deer spending a lot of time on that bait pile, working on that corn pile or whatever it is, you're probably going to want to set that camera to only taking a photo every 1 to 5 minutes, or you're just literally going to be going through thousands upon thousands upon thousands of photos. Jason, if I'm in a scenario where there's nothing like that, where I'm just examining an area or a trail or something like that, then I'm probably going to have it set to trigger, I might even do a 3-photo burst every minute, something like that, because without bait, I have a lower probability of catching a deer on camera. So I want to increase my odds of getting him on film by increasing, the rate at which it takes a photo. But if I kind of have them coming to bait and sitting at bait and eating there for minutes and minutes and minutes on end, I'm just reducing my workload by setting the camera to a photo every 1 to 5 minutes. And we've got that covered in our publication as well. That's a common question, so we've got a good couple paragraphs on that.
And again, we'll make that document that you mentioned earlier available in the show notes. Let me ask another question that I had written down. If you're going to call yourself a good steward of the land, a good steward of deer hunting, a good land manager, deer manager, etc., is doing one of these essential?
Ooh.
I'm not asking you to alienate yourself from any particular group. I'm just wondering. I've never done one. I owned this property that I had referred to recently. I don't own it anymore, but I had owned it for 13 years or 10 years, something like that, and never done one. And now wishing that I had, and I'm still hunting in that area and can still hunt there. But we've just guessed, and I'm just wondering, is this? I mean, we've got all this technology and all these cameras, and White Knuckle uses Spartan cameras, and they're great. We don't even have to go out there and check them because they're cellular cameras. But we've got all this technology available to us. Is it foolish not to try and do something like this, so that you are making an informed decision, and in making that informed decision, you're making a better decision, not just this year, but for years to come?
I think the way I would answer that, Jason, is if you're nuts like me about deer management, and I want to have as much valuable and reliable information as I can at my fingertips to both effectively and efficiently manage that deer population, then a camera survey, I think it's safe to use essential. That would be essential for me. Can I still effectively do a good job just by collecting harvest data, just by collecting observation data? You can do a very, very good job and be a very responsible conservationist, of the resource and of your property. I think it's just one of those next level things. Are you going to use your camera recreationally? And if you are, that's absolutely fine. They're there to have fun with. But you can also use it as a tool for management, and that's what I like to use it for, to inform me about that deer population, which is going to guide the decisions that I make in the fall in terms of what deer to harvest and how many.
And you bring up a good point. If you're going to do a trail camera survey, you might just as well be paying attention to what the weight of the deer is and things of that nature. If you're gonna do it, it really just gives you all of the answers to all of the questions, or gives you an idea of what the answer is to the question, at least an educated guess. Could we call it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I would even say it's beyond a guess. I mean, it's still very educational. It's providing good information, but the more systematic and consistent you do it, the more that you kind of follow our recipe for that process and doing it year after year, you're just going to have a catalog of information to draw from. So it's just going to make you, like you said, a better conservationist and a better steward of your property.
So what if you could name off the top 3 things that you're going to get out of doing a trail camera survey that a guy like you is going to be interested in, or a guy like me is going to be interested in? What are the top 3 pieces of information you're going to hope to garner from this?
For me, it's going to be number 1, recruitment. as unsexy as that sounds to people, because they're wanting to see bucks and antlers, I want to see fawns. How many fawns per doe on the average is the population producing? Then I want to see, okay, go ahead.
Why would you say recruitment? Why is that important?
Again, the recruitment is important because that's the productivity of our population. Just from a general standpoint, I know that if the herd is productive, those does are producing a lot of fawns, and those fawns are surviving and being recruited into the population. Things are really, really good. I've got a growing deer population.
I've heard you mention it so many times. I just wondered, why is recruitment important? Okay, what would the second one be?
For me, buck age structure. I want to know what the age distribution of the bucks on the property, and again, that's going to inform for me harvest management. I want to know which. So just age structure is going to give me an idea of what the surrounding culture, the hunting culture is. Are we not seeing a single buck over 2.5 years of age, or are we seeing bucks 4 to 5 years of age? All right, so that's great information for me. The last thing I'm going to do is I am developing my list of those bucks that maybe I've seen before in previous years. But those bucks that are, oh my gosh, that buck appears to be 3 years of age and he is going to be magnificent. And if I know that I have a good and steady buck age structure, then I say, looks like there's a good probability this buck, maybe I'm in a situation or a hunting culture where that buck could maybe live to 4 to 5 years of age. If you're not ever seeing a buck over 2.5 years of age, and then occasionally you see one 3 years of age, it's just telling you that bucks aren't living to maturity. And so that's going to inform me on what the probability of that buck living to maturity is. So,
right.
And a lot of people too, the term that's thrown around a lot now is a hit list of bucks on the property. I like to turn that around and say, and that is important. That is a good list of these bucks are eligible and that we are targeting them for harvest. What is just as important from a management perspective is our protect list.
Mm-hmm.
That is where me as a manager, I have seen this buck that I think is going to be outstanding, but he needs another year or two. I'm going to distribute that photo just as often as a hit list buck and say, look at this photo, look at it closely. This is a buck we want to protect at all costs because more than likely he's going to be really something special. So I like to have a hit list and a protect list.
I honestly, in thinking about this, I can't think of a better way to foster some good conversation and just goodwill, I would say, amongst, your landowners in your area, especially if you're in an area that has a whole bunch of different small parcels together. It's a good way to get everyone involved if they're interested in getting involved. It's a good way to get everyone involved in, sort of working together. And then I think when you all sit down and have all this information and you're going to provide to us this tool in order to get some good metrics on what we have on our respective properties, I think everyone then has a good idea of what they're really dealing with from a scientific perspective. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. I think it fosters, it's like a team building exercise too, and it shows everybody that you're in this together. You have to be in this together. If your management objectives are producing older age bucks, then what a great way to get together and have a conversation about some of these photos. What do y'all think about this deer? What do do we collectively, is this something we want to try to let him get another year or two older? And whether I harvest this buck or you harvest this buck, we did it together as a team. I think that's a very, very effective way to go about it. Yeah. Right.
And the one thing that I will say, having shared information with my neighbors over the course of the years, is that As many times as I've gotten deer where I went, oh my gosh, that's a shooter. I'm not telling anyone about it. Every one of them at the end of the year would go, when we didn't get the deer, and, it would just end up coming up out of one of our mouths at some case or at some point in time. Everyone's got the same picture of that deer. So it's not like there's a whole bunch of secrets when you're dealing with 600 acres or 500 acres. It's likely that deer will frequent, would it be fair to say 50 to 75% of that property as a whole? On
a scale of 500 to 600 acres?
Yeah.
It easily could.
Yeah.
It easily could.
I know it's different.
It may only be visiting 10% of your property. But yeah, that is certainly fair to say. That's certainly possible.
Anything else you'd like to add? I think, just sort of defining exactly what a trail camera survey is and what it accomplishes for a lot of us who are laymen in this whole deer management area. It sheds a lot of light on what it is, why it is that we're doing it. I've heard of it, whether it's Kip Adams or you or Grant Woods or anybody that's talking about it. I've heard it so many times. I've never done it, and now I'm wishing I had, because I'd be so much farther ahead of the game having done it at this point. I could have had all these years of data.
That happens to all of us.
Right, exactly.
Even the best, like you and me. Happens to everybody. But now and the thing about it is, this is going to be fun to do. This is not like something we're really asking to go out and you're going to have to work hard. This is fun to do. All we're saying is take it to that extra little step and record and catalog what you're doing, and you just have a wonderful tool of knowledge to draw from in the future for your management.
Well, I'm excited about doing it, even though I've stated in recent podcasts that I'm going to hunt primarily public hunting. I still have this property that I manage and get to go on whenever I want. I'm kind of saving it for the boys. But I think what I'm going to do is put together a little Facebook group for the group of landowners, and we'll all pick a time. That's one other question I wanted to ask. Is there a particular period of time in the summer that is better to do this than another? Is it when they're fully developed, so late August, or is there a different time that you would recommend doing this? Yeah,
a great question. It's covered in the publication, but I'm glad you brought it up. We'll cover it now. It's another it depends. So in your neck of the woods, you can have a good, reliable survey early in the fall, more so than we can in the South, especially in Mississippi. The reason for that is, and remember what I said from my perspective, the most important thing I want to get out of this is I want to know what that recruitment of the population is. And in a lot of places in the South, when you're running this survey right late summer, early fall, you want to get it in before deer season, is when fawns are dropped. And what we found in Mississippi, that in a lot of times of the year, or when these surveys are being conducted, that we bias our fawn recruitment estimate very low, because in a lot of places the fawns are not routinely traveling with their mother yet. So remember, for several weeks after a doe drops her fawn, that fawn's not moving much. It's just staying bedded, and mom's going to come back and feed it. You're going to need a month. 6 weeks is even better. And the more the better. When those fawns are routinely traveling with their mom, that's when you're going to be able to get a good camera survey so that you can estimate recruitment. Okay. So depending on where you're at, so you kind of have to look at, for like you, Jason, where you're at is when you can get this from the Department of Natural Resources. When is the average, when's the rut? When are the average fawning dates? And then when does bow season begin? Okay. And so I want to have conducted that survey before the season begins, because I want the survey to inform my harvesting decisions. So I would basically wait as long as you could until, before bow season. That's going to give you the most reliable. Now, what we also do in the South is we do a post-season. That means after deer season closes, then we can also do one then. And so there's pros and cons to both. The pro to doing it before the season is that information is helping you make decisions on particular bucks to harvest or not to harvest.
Sure.
The post season, you're going to get more information about which fawns. You get a better, more reliable estimate of recruitment because you really know which ones lived, not just the ones that were born and lived for a month after birth, which ones lived through the winter, because some of those fawns are going to die of other causes. But you're going to miss, you're not going to know. Your hit list could change for the next year because you're going to have antler drop after that. Some of those bucks that you hope to live, you don't see them.
Right.
You don't know if you didn't get them on camera or not, or they were harvested. So there's pros and cons to both.
Well, great. I will definitely report back with our findings. Again, we're going to make that publication available via our show notes. Bronson's kind enough to offer that up, so we appreciate your generosity there. It certainly sounds like that'll be a good tool and one that'll help us do our job a little bit easier when it comes to this survey. So I appreciate you taking the time yet again. If you would, for the listeners that haven't heard about MSU's Deer Lab or Deer University, your podcast, would you tell everyone how they can find that?
Yeah, absolutely. Our podcast is called Deer University, and it's focused on deer biology and management. And we think that just about anybody that hunts or is crazy about deer or wants to learn about deer, they would find the topics interesting. So you can find the podcast in iTunes as well as any of the other what do you call them, Jason?
So whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, Pod, whatever, Podbean, I don't know, all of that.
Podbean, yeah. And if you want to do it the old-fashioned way and listen to them episode by episode, you can just go to our website, msudeerlab.com, and we've got a button there for podcast, and click on that, and you can listen to them over your laptop or download them or whatever way you want to do. And I wanted to tell everybody, Jason, we've got a really cool project coming up that we are going to utilize the podcast as well as social media while we're doing it. And we're going to do some really cool stuff with the deer forage selection. So we're going to collect a lot of very common deer forages throughout the eastern U.S., and we're going to provide all of those to our captive deer herd and see which ones they choose. And so we're going to be really interested about that, and we're going to kind of document it. And so we're going to be able to film it and show the deer choosing which forages that they choose and prefer. And we think it's going to be a lot of fun, and we think it's going to be really educational. So over the next month, just keep an eye out for that on our podcast and on our Facebook page, MSU Deer Lab on Facebook.
Great. Having listened to your podcast many, many times now, and I've found myself listening to them 2, sometimes 3 times just to get all the information or try and get as much as I can. There's really a lot of useful information, things that you normally wouldn't think of that really do pertain to hunting as much as managing deer. And the one episode that I found particularly interesting, which might make me sound boring, was the one on the tree stumps and turning them into essentially a mineral site. It was really interesting to hear how that whole process works. But I felt like I learned a lot. Well,
I was going to plug that, Jason, when you were talking about not using bait, bait being illegal or any attractive in attractant, in Wisconsin. Well, there's where you can use the mineral stumps to draw them in.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you haven't heard that episode, I would say, and you're thinking about doing one of these in an area where baiting isn't legal, that's a great idea. It was fascinating to me to hear my first instinct was, how could it turn into a mineral stump? But once you listen, systematically to the podcast, it all makes sense, and it makes perfect sense. So I found a lot of value in it, and appreciate what it is that you guys do, and hope any of our listeners have a chance to go in and check it out. We've definitely enjoyed listening to it. Many of the guys on the team have commented, and I think you're doing a great job. So, and thanks for taking the time out of your schedule just to be with us today.
You bet. I am happy to, and as I've said, Jason, every time, just give me a call. Just let me know, and if I'm free to talk, I'm happy to talk. This is what I do. This is my life, so I'm happy to talk about deer biology and management.
All right. Well, we'll keep our eyes peeled on your Facebook page for those upcoming announcements. And again, I'll have everything in the show notes that Bronson sends me in terms of the document that he mentioned about using to do a deer study. So thanks again, Bronson. I appreciate you taking the time, and I'll absolutely be in touch once I get my little Facebook group and deer survey underway.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Well, there you have it, my conversation with Bronson Strickland regarding trail cameras and trail camera surveys. Like I said in the start of the podcast, I found it very fascinating and interesting, all the different information that you can garner from the trail camera photos. If any of you would like to find out what exactly you need to do a trail camera survey, I will have in the show notes that PDF file that he referred to several times. It's a pretty complete guide on how to conduct a trail camera survey, and probably more important than that, is why you should want to do a trail camera survey. So I think it's one of the things that's very overlooked as we get into the summer months here. Everyone's, throwing their cameras out to look for the biggest buck in the area, and certainly that's part of the puzzle. It's also nice to know what kind of sex ratio you're looking at, what kind of age structure you're looking at, and from there I think we can all make a better decision on what is a good idea to shoot and what isn't a good idea to shoot. And if you have neighbors that are open to that, certainly include them in it. And if they don't want to be included in that, I think it's great. It's a great idea to just simply share the information that you found with them using, again, this tool that Bronson gave us in the PDF file that will be, again, like I said, in the show notes. So with that, I'll close out the show today. I hope, again, that you enjoyed the podcast, and that's all for me. I've got nothing else. Jason out.